The morning air was cold in Neo-Seoul. The year was 2157, and the city had grown into a massive structure of steel and glass that reached high into the clouds. Officer Han Jae-sung stood at his usual spot in Sector 7, one of the lower levels of the city. He looked up at the bright lights of the upper levels, where the rich people lived. Down here, things were different. The streets were darker, and the air smelled of old metal and forgotten dreams. Han checked his police tablet and adjusted his black uniform. He had been an officer for 15 years, and he knew every corner of these lower levels. The people here called him the Shadow because of how he appeared suddenly and how quickly he made their money disappear. Han didn't care what they called him. To him, these people were just numbers on his daily report. The streets were starting to wake up. Workers moved quickly toward the transit stations, keeping their heads down. Street vendors set up their small shops, selling hot food and basic supplies. The morning fog from the city's cooling systems made everything look gray and wet. Han watched as people walked past him. Some took longer routes to avoid getting close to him. Others quickly hid whatever they were carrying in their pockets. Han smiled. He liked how people feared him. Fear made his job easier. His tablet beeped. The morning report showed that someone had reported a homeless person sleeping near Maintenance Hub 23. Han started walking that way. The hub was important. It helped keep the upper levels of the city running smoothly. The rich people up there didn't want to see any homeless people near their precious machinery. As Han walked, he passed by Lee Mei-ray's food cart. She was new in the area, having shown up about a month ago. She sold hot soup and rice to the workers. Han didn't pay much attention to her. She always had her permits in order and paid her fees on time. She was one of the few vendors he couldn't squeeze for extra money. The streets got narrower as Han got closer to the hub. The buildings here were old and covered in pipes that carried water and power to the upper levels. Water dripped constantly from these pipes, making small puddles on the ground. The light from the upper levels barely reached here, leaving most of the area in shadows. Han checked his stun baton, making sure it was charged. He didn't really need it. Most homeless people ran away as soon as they saw him. But he liked having it ready. Sometimes, people needed to learn respect the hard way. Near the hub, Han could see someone sitting against the wall. It was a man wearing old, dirty clothes. Next to him was a small bag that probably contained everything he owned. The man was Kim Da-won, though Han didn't know his name yet. Kim was trying to stay warm by huddling close to one of the warm pipes that came down from the upper levels. Han walked closer, his boots making loud sounds on the metal floor. He saw Kim quickly try to hide something in his pocket. Han's eyes narrowed. He had seen that movement many times before. It usually meant credits, digital money that people carried on small chips. Han's day was about to get more interesting. The air felt colder now, and the machinery in the hub made low humming sounds. Steam rose from the warm pipes, creating a misty curtain around them. Above them, the rich people of Neo-Seoul were just starting their day, not knowing or caring about what happened down in these lower levels. But down here, in the shadows of their great city, Officer Han was about to remind another person who really owned these streets. Officer Han moved closer to Kim Da-won, his footsteps echoing against the metal floor of the maintenance hub. The steam from the warm pipes made Kim's outline look blurry, but Han could clearly see him trying to make himself smaller against the wall. The morning light barely reached this deep into the lower levels, and the shadows made everything look gray and cold. "Stand up," Han ordered, his voice sharp and loud. Kim moved slowly, his old joints stiff from sitting on the cold ground. He was shorter than Han and much thinner. His clothes were worn but clean. He tried his best to stay neat despite living on the streets. "I'm sorry, officer," Kim said softly, keeping his eyes down. "I was just trying to stay warm. I'll move right away." His voice was gentle and respectful, but this only made Han more suspicious. In his experience, politeness usually meant people had something to hide. Han pulled out his tablet and held it up. "Identification," he demanded. Kim reached into his pocket with shaking hands and pulled out an old ID chip. Han grabbed it roughly and scanned it. The tablet showed Kim's information. Age 45. No criminal record. Former maintenance worker who lost his job when machines replaced human workers. What else is in your pockets? Han asked, even though he had no right to ask this question. He had done this hundreds of times before. People in the lower levels didn't know their rights, and even if they did, they couldn't afford to complain. Kim hesitated for a moment. This was exactly what Han was waiting for. He stepped closer, using his height to tower over Kim. Empty your pockets. Now. His hand rested on his stun baton, a clear threat. Slowly, Kim reached into his pocket and pulled out a small credit chip. In the dim light, Han could see the number on its display. 2,000 credits. It wasn't much by upper-level standards. Probably enough for food for a month in the lower levels. But it was more than Han expected a homeless person to have. Where did you get this? Han demanded, snatching the chip from Kim's trembling hands. Stolen, I bet. He knew it probably wasn't stolen. The serial numbers on the chip were clean, and Kim's record was clear. But Han had already decided how this was going to end. Please, officer, Kim said, his voice shaking. That's all I have. I saved it from my last job. For food. And he stopped talking when Han stepped even closer. In the distance, Lee May-Ray was setting up her food cart. She had a clear view of the maintenance hub, but Han didn't notice her. He never paid attention to the vendors unless he was collecting fees from them. May-Ray stood very still, watching everything that happened. You're in a restricted area, Han said, pocketing Kim's credit chip. That's a serious offense. They both knew it wasn't true. The maintenance hub was public space, and many people used the warm pipes for shelter during cold mornings. Kim didn't argue. He knew it wouldn't help. He had seen others try to argue with officers before, and it never ended well. His shoulders slumped as he watched his savings disappear into Han's pocket. The machinery in the hub hummed louder, as if trying to drown out what was happening. Above them, the upper levels of Neo-Seoul sparkled in the morning sun, while down here, in the shadows, another injustice was about to unfold. But this time would be different. This time, someone was watching. Someone with the power to do more than just watch. Officer Han looked at the credit chip in his hand one more time. The morning was getting colder, and more steam rose from the pipes around the maintenance hub. Kim Dae-won stood quietly, his eyes fixed on the metal floor beneath his feet. He knew what was coming next. He had heard stories about Officer Han from others who lived on the streets. Turn around, Han ordered, his voice cutting through the sound of the humming machinery. Hands against the wall. There was no reason for this command. Kim had broken no laws. His identification was valid. But Han had done this so many times before that it felt like a ritual to him. Kim turned slowly, placing his hands on the cold metal wall. His fingers trembled, not just from the cold but from fear. The wall was wet from the condensation dripping down from the upper levels of Neo-Seoul. Please, Kim said softly. I just need enough credits for food this week. His voice was barely a whisper, lost in the mechanical sounds around them. Han's response was quick and harsh. The stun baton struck Kim's side, sending him to his knees. The weapon was set to its lowest setting. Han didn't want to leave any marks that might cause questions later. But even at low power, the pain was intense. Quiet, Han said, standing over Kim. People like you need to learn respect. He activated the baton again, this time pressing it against Kim's shoulder. The electrical charge made Kim's muscles tighten painfully. At her food cart, Lee May-Ray watched everything. Her hands moved over her cooking equipment, but her eyes never left the scene at the maintenance hub. To anyone passing by, she looked like a regular vendor preparing for the morning rush. But something was different about her eyes. They seemed to glow slightly in the dim light. Han grabbed Kim's collar and pulled him up, pushing him against the wall again. Next time I see you here, it will be worse, he threatened. The credit chip felt heavy in his pocket. Another successful morning in the lower levels. Kim slid down the wall, holding his side where the baton had struck him. The pain spread through his body in waves. He had lost everything he had saved over the past 3 months. The credits that would have bought him food and maybe even a few nights in a shelter were gone. Han turned to leave, straightening his uniform. He felt powerful, untouchable. In all his years doing this, no one had ever reported him. The people in the lower levels knew better than to complain. The system protected officers like him. But as Han took his first step away from the maintenance hub, something strange happened. The air around him seemed to get thicker, heavier. The constant hum of machinery grew distant, as if someone had turned down the volume of the world. At her cart, Mei Ray raised her hand slightly. A small device on her wrist glowed with a soft blue light. Time itself seemed to slow down around the maintenance hub. Han felt his legs getting heavy, like he was trying to walk through deep water. Kim was still on the ground, but now a strange calmness had come over him. The pain from the baton was fading, replaced by a warm, peaceful feeling. He didn't understand what was happening, but somehow he knew that things were about to change. The upper levels of Neo Seoul continued to shine above them, unaware of what was unfolding in the shadows below. But in this small corner of the lower levels, something impossible was beginning. Justice was about to take a very unusual form, and Officer Han's world was about to turn upside down. Lee Mirei stepped away from her food cart. The morning crowd had not arrived yet, and the streets were still quiet. She walked toward the maintenance hub with calm, measured steps. As she moved, small lights began to glow beneath her skin, like stars shining through thin clouds. The device on her wrist continued to pulse with blue light. Around her, time moved strangely. The steam from the pipes hung frozen in the air. The constant drip of water from the upper levels had stopped mid-fall. Even the humming of machinery seemed to pause, leaving an unusual silence in the lower levels of Neo Seoul. Officer Han tried to move, but his body felt like it was trapped in invisible honey. He could only watch as Mirei approached. Now he noticed things about her that he had somehow missed before. Her eyes were not brown like most people's, but had rings of silver in them. Her movements were too smooth, too perfect to be human. Officer Han Jae-sung, Mirei said. Her voice had changed. It now had layers to it, like many voices speaking as one. I am Observer 247 of the Galactic Council. For 3 Earth months, I have watched this sector. I have seen everything you have done. Kim Dae-won sat against the wall, frozen in time like everything else. Only Han and Mirei could move and speak. Han tried to reach for his weapon, but his arms wouldn't respond. Fear began to creep into his mind. Real fear, the kind he usually caused in others. The Galactic Council has strict rules about interfering with developing worlds, Mirei continued. She held up her hand, and a hologram appeared above it. It showed images of Han's previous actions, every person he had hurt, every credit chip he had stolen. But we also have rules about justice. The air around them began to shimmer with strange lights. The metal walls of the maintenance hub reflected colors that Han had never seen before. Mirei's human appearance began to fade, revealing something beneath that Han's mind could barely understand. Your kind believes that true understanding comes from experience, Mirei said. The silver in her eyes now covered them completely. The Council agrees. You will understand what you have done. You will feel what others have felt. Han wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He wanted to shout, but his voice was trapped in his throat. The lights around them grew brighter, and the air filled with a soft humming sound that was different from the usual machinery noise. Time will reset in exactly 1 minute, Mirei explained. Her form was now almost completely changed. She looked like a being made of light and flowing crystal. In that minute, you will experience everything you have done to others. Every pain, every fear, every loss of dignity. The credit chip in Han's pocket began to feel hot. The stolen money that had made him feel so powerful now burned against his leg. Above them, the upper levels of Neo-Seoul continued to shine, unaware that an advanced alien civilization was delivering justice in the shadows below. May-Ray raised both hands, and the strange lights began to swirl around Han. "Your lesson begins now," she said. Her voice echoed with the wisdom of a civilization thousands of years ahead of Earth. "Remember, Officer Han, what you are about to feel is exactly what you have made others feel." The lights engulfed Han completely, and his world began to change. In the frozen time of that maintenance hub, justice was about to take a form that no human court could ever provide. The lights surrounding Officer Han grew brighter, and suddenly his world turned upside down. In an instant, he was no longer himself. He had become Kim Da-won, looking up at his own face twisted with cruel authority. The transformation was complete. He was now experiencing everything from Kim's perspective. Han felt the cold metal floor beneath him, the dampness seeping through his thin clothes. He felt the weakness in his legs from not having enough food. The constant hunger that had been Kim's companion for months now became Han's reality. Every joint ached with the bone-deep cold of the lower levels. The officer standing over him, his own face, looked huge and terrifying. Han had never realized how frightening he appeared to others. He saw himself reach for the stun baton, and real fear filled his mind. Now he understood why people took longer routes to avoid him. He felt what true helplessness was like. May-Ray stood nearby, her crystalline form glowing softly. She controlled the experience, making sure Han felt everything with perfect clarity. "This is not an illusion," her layered voice explained. "These are real memories, real feelings, taken directly from those you have hurt." Han tried to speak, but found himself saying Kim's words instead. "Please, officer. That's all I have." He felt the shame of having to beg, the despair of knowing it would make no difference. The credits in the chip represented 3 months of careful saving, 3 months of picking up small jobs and skipping meals. Then the pain began. Han felt the stun baton strike his side, exactly as he had struck Kim moments before. The agony was worse than he had imagined. Even at its lowest setting, the weapon caused intense pain. He felt his muscles lock up, felt the helpless twitching as electricity coursed through his body. But the physical pain was not the worst part. Han felt the deep humiliation that came with being treated like nothing, like something less than human. He experienced the crushing weight of dignity being stripped away, of being powerless to protect himself or his meager possessions. Through it all, May-Ray's presence remained constant. The strange, shimmering colors of her true form filled the frozen air around them. "Feel the impact of your choices," she said. "Understand the consequences of your actions." Han watched through Kim's eyes as his own hand took away the credit chip. He felt the despair of losing everything, the terror of not knowing how he would survive the coming weeks. The upper levels of Neo-Seoul sparkled above, as distant and unreachable as the stars. More memories began to flow through Han's mind. He experienced fragments of Kim's daily life, the constant search for warm places to sleep, the shame of asking for help, the way people turned away when they saw him coming. He felt the grief of losing his job to automation, the slow slide into homelessness, despite his best efforts. The mechanical hum of the maintenance hub seemed to grow louder, mixing with the strange harmonics of May-Ray's alien technology. Time remained frozen for everyone else, but for Han, each second stretched into an eternity of understanding. In his ordinary human mind, something fundamental was beginning to change. The memories continued to flow through Officer Han's mind as he experienced life through Kim Da-won's eyes. Each moment brought new understanding, new pain, and new wisdom. May-Ray's alien technology made sure he felt everything with perfect clarity, unable to hide from the truth of his actions. Han experienced a day in Kim's life. He felt the stiffness in his joints as he woke up in a cold corner behind the maintenance hub. He felt the embarrassment as people walked past, some giving looks of disgust, others pretending not to see him at all. He understood now why Kim kept his clothes as clean as possible. It was his last attempt to hold onto his dignity. Through Kim's memories, Han saw himself walking through the lower levels. He watched as other officers, following his example, harassed innocent people. He felt the fear that spread through the streets whenever a police uniform appeared. The power he had once felt proud of now seemed ugly and wrong. Your actions spread beyond your own cruelty, Myre's voice explained. Her crystalline form pulsed with gentle light. You taught others to be cruel. You made cruelty seem normal. The air around them shimmered with strange colors as more memories unfolded. Han lived through the moment when Kim lost his job. He felt the panic as Kim read the notice, replaced by an AI system that could work 24 hours without rest. He experienced the shame of cleaning out his work locker, of telling his elderly mother he could no longer help support her. The stolen credit chip burned in Han's pocket as he felt Kim's struggles to save that money. Each credit represented a missed meal, a night spent in the cold instead of paying for shelter. Han had taken 3 months of sacrifice in just a few cruel minutes. Myre moved closer, her alien presence both beautiful and terrifying. Feel the weight of each choice, she said. Understand the ripples of pain you have caused. The frozen steam around them created strange patterns in the air, like tears suspended in time. Han tried to turn away from the memories, but he couldn't escape them. He felt Kim's loneliness, his hope that somehow things would get better. He experienced the moment when Kim realized that the system meant to protect people had become a source of fear instead. The mechanical hum of Neo's soul seemed to fade away, replaced by the sound of Kim's thoughts, his quiet dignity in the face of suffering. Han saw how Kim still tried to help others when he could, sharing what little he had with those even worse off than himself. This is humanity, Myre said, her layered voice gentle but firm. This is what you have forgotten. In your quest for power, you lost sight of your own kind. Her form shifted, showing glimpses of worlds and civilizations far beyond Earth's understanding. Han felt tears on his face. Kim's tears, his tears, they had become the same. The weight of understanding pressed down on him like a physical force. Everything he had believed about power, about respect, about right and wrong, was changing. Above them, the upper levels of Neo-Seoul continued to shine, unaware of the profound transformation happening in the shadows below. In the frozen moment of Myre's intervention, Officer Han Jae-sun was learning what it truly meant to be human. Time began to move again in the lower levels of Neo-Seoul. The steam from the pipes resumed its endless dance, and the mechanical hum of the maintenance hub returned to its normal volume. Officer Han found himself back in his own body, standing where he had been just a minute ago. But everything had changed. Han's hands shook as he reached into his pocket and pulled out Kim's credit chip. The memory of what it felt like to lose everything was still fresh in his mind. His legs felt weak, and he had to lean against the wall to stay standing. The wall was cold and wet, just as it had felt in Kim's memories. Kim Dae-won still sat on the ground, holding his side where the stunned Baitlan had struck him. He looked up at Han with fear in his eyes, expecting more pain. But the cruel officer from a minute ago was gone. In his place stood a man who had lived through every moment of suffering he had caused. Myre's true form faded, and she appeared human once again. She watched carefully as Han took his first steps in this new understanding. The strange lights that had filled the air disappeared, but their effect remained. Han would never forget what he had experienced. "I'm sorry," Han said, his voice breaking. He knelt down next to Kim, holding out the credit chip with trembling fingers. "Please take it back. All of it." The words felt small compared to what he had done, but they were a beginning. Kim looked confused. He slowly reached for the chip, expecting it to be pulled away at the last moment. But Han placed it gently in his hand. The same hand that had struck with the stunned baton now helped Kim stand up from the cold ground. "The pain will fade soon," Han said, remembering how the stunned baton had felt. "But you need medical attention. I'll help you get to a clinic." He knew of a free clinic in Sector 9 that wouldn't ask questions. In his old life, he had avoided that area, not wanting to see the people who needed help. The morning crowd was starting to fill the streets now. Workers hurried past, trying not to look at the scene by the maintenance hub. But some of them stopped and stared. They had never seen Officer Han help anyone before. Mei Ray returned to her food cart, but her eyes stayed on Han and Kim. The device on her wrist had stopped glowing, but it remained ready. The Galactic Council's justice protocol was designed not just to punish, but to transform. Han looked up at the shining upper levels of Neo Sol. He had always seen them as a reminder of his power over the lower levels. Now he saw them differently, as a symbol of the divide he had helped maintain. But that would change, starting today. There are other officers, Han said quietly to Kim. Officers who do what I did. They need to understand too. His mind was already forming plans. He knew the names, the places, the patterns of abuse. He had been part of the system. Now he would work to change it. 3 months had passed since that morning at the maintenance hub. The lower levels of Neo Sol had begun to change. Officer Han Jae-sung sat at his desk in the police station, reviewing reports on his tablet. But these were different reports now. They documented cases of police misconduct and plans for reform. Kim Da-won no longer slept near the maintenance hub. Han had helped him find a small apartment in Sector 8, where many former maintenance workers lived. Kim now worked at a community center, helping others who had lost their jobs to automation. His story had become a symbol of hope in the lower levels. Mei Ray's food cart was still there, but everyone now noticed something different about her. She served not just food, but also wisdom. People came to her with their troubles, and somehow things began to improve after talking with her. The Galactic Council had approved her request to stay longer, observing humanity's capacity for change. Han stood up from his desk and walked to the window. The view showed both the gleaming upper levels and the shadowy lower sectors of Neo Sol. He no longer saw this divide as natural or right. Every day, he worked to build bridges between these two worlds. Officer Han, a young police cadet, called from the doorway. The ethics training session is about to begin. Han nodded and gathered his materials. He now taught all new officers about empathy and justice, sharing his own story as a warning and a lesson. In the training room, 20 new cadets waited. Han looked at their fresh faces and remembered his own early days. Today, he began. I want to tell you about a morning that changed everything. It's a story about power, justice, and what it truly means to protect and serve. As Han spoke, Mei Ray watched from outside the police station. Her wrist device showed readings that pleased the Galactic Council. Humanity was not perfect, but it could learn and grow. Han's transformation had started a chain reaction in Neo Sol's law enforcement. The changes were small at first, officers thinking twice before using force, listening more than threatening, helping instead of hurting. But small changes grew into bigger ones. Other precincts started copying Han's training program. The number of complaints dropped. Trust began to grow. Kim often visited the police station now, sharing his perspective with new officers. The fear that had lived in his eyes was gone. He and Han had become examples of what reconciliation could look like. Their stories spread through the lower levels and even reached the upper city. Mei Ray's reports to the Galactic Council were full of hope. She had seen how one moment of true understanding could change a person, and how one person's change could transform a community. Earth might be ready for contact sooner than anyone had expected. As the sun set over Neo Sol, its light touched both the highest towers and the deepest levels equally. In his classroom, Han finished his lesson with words he now lived by. Power is not about making others feel small. True power is using your strength to lift others up. The future was still uncertain, but something fundamental had shifted in the city, and it had all started with a single minute of justice, delivered by a being from the stars who believed that understanding was the key to change.